449, Congressman Mark Green joins me on the broadcast. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
I know you served 2 tours in Afghanistan, and you also serve on the Armed Services Committee. You just heard the president speak about what's happening in Afghanistan. Let's just go fresh from your reaction to the president's speech.
Well, I pretty infuriating, if you ask me. I mean, he basically defended this debacle that's happened in Afghanistan, blaming it on first, a plan put in place by President Trump, and then, the people of Afghanistan. I will tell you that since 2014, the Afghan forces have been doing all the direct fighting on the ground. We've been there in a support role, providing intelligence assets through the CIA and air support, and really what a lot of people don't realize, contractor support, which keeps their aircraft and their equipment, functioning. So this assertion that they don't want to fight is quite honestly blatantly false. They want to fight. They just felt abandoned when we picked up out of Bagram Air Force Base, our air base, and just left in the middle of the night without even telling them. So I think they see the writing on the wall, and to protect themselves, they're trying to blend into the population, the fighters, the Afghan fighters. So he is not painting an accurate picture of what has happened.
What did you see on the ground? Because I was reading the agreement that was signed February 29, 2020, and we even went by their calendar as well, telling them agreeing that we would be out. Should we have agreed to a date certain or declared a date certain?
Absolutely not. I mean, that declaring a date certain is a bad idea, and I've been, making that argument for a long time. You make your withdrawal based on the conditions on the ground, and as I understood it, Mike Pompeo is my West Point classmate. As I understood it from Mike, they had conditions that they had set for the withdrawal, and if those weren't triggered, then they would stop what they were doing. Here, basically President Biden has said, "Oh, well, we're going to put this on the clock and get out of there," and that is a failure to prevent what's happened. And what we have now is the Taliban in control of a country with Al Qaeda, ISIS, all these jihadist terrorists who now have a free place to train and prepare to do their attacks on the world in the West.
What dumbfounded me was if you put in writing that we're going to leave on a date certain, and if in the plan I'm looking at, they said that the U.S. would have a plan for removing themselves, their personnel, their allies from the region, I don't know why we couldn't have anticipated this and moved people out sequentially in some type of ordered fashion. I also don't understand, my understanding is Supreme Leader Hibatullah Akhundzada, I think is his name, is the Supreme Leader of the Taliban. Why we can't say, you'd better give us a perimeter around that airport, you better give us a secure zone or village for people to move into as they transition out, and that we keep one air base. We left all 5 air bases.
Yeah, seven. So, yeah, absolutely. They closed 7 bases and fell into one location in Kabul, which was the stupidest thing on the planet. And that was, according to the military leaders I've spoken with, that was Joe Biden's decision. And you look at Bagram Air Force Base, Air Base, that place has runways that are much more adaptive to doing a non-combatant evacuation operation than is the Kabul airport. I do not know. I cannot explain. And my friends who are also military guys cannot understand why they collapsed to one location and thought that was somehow a good idea. They could have kept Bagram open and Kandahar and kind of collapsed those simultaneously. It boggles the mind the way this has been executed.
You're on the Armed Services Committee. Were you briefed over the weekend? What can you tell us from your latest briefing?
The intel that we're getting pretty much coincides with what everybody is hearing from the open source information. And of course, I couldn't divulge anything that's classified, but we had a presentation on Sunday with the White House itself, a briefing from both Secretary Bilkin and Secretary Austin, and it was disappointing, but nothing that I've heard. Let me just say this: the open source information is for the most part accurate, and what people are hearing in the news is what's happening on the ground.
So when President Biden today said, if you're not willing to fight for yourself, we're not going to stay there and waste blood and treasure fighting for people who don't want to fight for themselves. What I heard you say today is that they've been doing the majority of fighting, but that they felt abandoned, and that is what deflated them. That's what demoralized them.
Absolutely. They've been doing the ground combat since 2014. I mean, our forces have done nothing but guard perimeters and pretty much gather intelligence, pass intel information to them, and then they went and did all the missions. They pushed back on the Taliban, for the past several years, taking thousands of casualties. I think I heard a number earlier, 50,000 casualties over those years where they were the primary combat force on the ground. So to suggest that these people aren't willing to fight is just dishonest.
But do you think, Congressman, were they fighting for themselves or us? Because he said something that was really interesting. He said we paid their salary. So that's the first I had heard that the Afghan military salaries were being paid by the United States government.
I think, all of the billions of dollars that we've spent, and I think it was $83 billion total that went to the Afghan military, paid for their equipment, their fuel. It paid for their physical assets, for example, buildings and grounds that were built to maintain aircraft. And I assume, he's telling the truth there that also paid salaries.
Wow. What's your message to your constituents here in the state of Tennessee?
I want to say to the soldiers who have fought in Afghanistan, my brothers and sisters in arms, that you did not do this. Your sacrifice was not in vain. For 20 years, you bought America freedom from terrorists. What happens now is on Joe Biden. But your sacrifice, our friends who didn't come home, that sacrifice was worthwhile. And it bought America freedom from an attack. And I want every one of you to hold your heads up high. I want you, if you're having a hard time with this, and I know some of you are, pick up the phone, dial for some support. There are organizations like Reboot Recovery. You can go to Reboot Recovery right now and talk live with a person through chat. This is your sacrifice was not in vain, and I want to be very clear about that. You can hold your head up high. You served honorably, and you protected America for 20 years.
All right, Congressman Mark Green, thanks for being on the broadcast today.
Thank you for having me.